Looking out on the cultural wasteland that surrounds us, it can be difficult for many to understand how we arrived at our current moment.
I guess I'm just supposed to like take for granted that everything is horrible right now. It's like everything is worse than it's ever been, and there's nothing good in the world, and this is all just trash. There's been no improvements on any front. This is the worst things have ever been. I don't really believe those things. I think that there is a lot of serious issues plaguing our world today, some of which may even be unsolvable. But I don't think that we can just write off present day society as like a total wash. I think there actually is some good things we've done and are doing, albeit too slowly.
Gender ideology is pushed on kindergartners.
I don't know what you mean by pushed off on. I think there clearly is a point where where you can be like too pushy with a gender ideology or whatever the fudge. But like, I think the point of just like being open to the idea that that form of expression might present itself is just being realistic. I don't think anyone's being propagandized to on this. I think that we're just trying to create an atmosphere that's more open to those sort of like ideas because it's been identified as a legitimate human phenomena. And maybe we'll look back on our handling of it and say like, we didn't really do the right thing here. Or maybe we're going to look back on it and say, you know, we should have gone further, or maybe we went too far. I don't know what the future is going to look back on this and say. But what I do know is that acknowledging it and trying to do something about it, I'm talking about gender dysphoria here, and treating it in the way that is the most like proven, like successful, which is through transition and through the acceptance of that person's identity. I think that that's probably going to be viewed as a more positive thing than strip their kid of every facet of their identity and reprogram them through like coercion and propaganda and deprivation and social isolation and all of these tactics that are just really a form of psychological abuse and totally disgusting. I think the fact that we have parents who are doing that kind of thing is far more bothersome to me and far more of an indication of society's decay or wickedry than schools being open to the possibility that students in their midst might have gender dysphoria, a proven psychological phenomenon.
Sex changes are pushed on teenagers. Riots receive the same.
Sex changes are pushed on teenagers. I don't really think that's happening. I just don't agree with the characterization. I'm not going to get into it for everyone.
Sanction of the government, borders are wide open to human traffickers, and
I mean that's been true for a minute. You can't really close a border of our size without an enormous expenditure. Like the southern border of the US is huge and treacherous. The idea that you can solve that problem easily with some solution like a wall, or I mean like you'd need like a standing army at our borders at all times to prevent any new entries, and it's just like the expense doesn't just like it's not justified by the results. Like our border security is sufficient for what it needs to be. Maybe at some point in the future circumstances will change and we'll have to beef up security or something. That hasn't happened yet. So,
and homeless encampments filled with drug users have become a regular feature of major American cities.
Yeah, I mean, that's a result of, you know, massive economic disparity between people. I think a lot of conservatives, when they talk about this issue, they tend to act like people did drugs and then lost all their money because they were on drugs and then became homeless because they lost all their money because they were on drugs. And I feel like a lot of times people who are doing these drugs in an abusive way tend to already be in dire straits. They tend to be people who don't have much to look forward to, who don't have financial security, things of that nature. I mean, the reason we know that rich people do copious amounts of drugs. You know, they don't lose their jobs and their lives over it typically. Now, every once in a while, you will get one that becomes so abusive with the substances that they do end up losing their careers over it. Andy Dick or Lindsay Lohan. But for the most part, celebrities kind of can do drugs in a consequence-free way because they're shielded by sheer amounts of money. And they never, you know, very rarely do they ever experience like the true lows of, you know, addiction. So I think that a lot of times, you know, the people who you see in these homeless tent cities addicted to, you know, fentanyl are people who are driven to do that by being in really shitty circumstances to begin with. So you have to, at that point, look at like what kind of society creates this. And I think that your answer would probably be something about moral degradation, whereas my answer, that's actually backed up way more by data, would be that economic disparity is the culprit. But of course, conservatives don't want to accept that because it's a challenge to the notion that free enterprise capitalism is somehow the answer to how we should socially and economically organize our society. And the criticisms of that, you know, I could be here all day.
While centrists and moderate liberals often express their amazement at what they see as the sudden and radical decline in the quality of American life.
Are we just going through like the laundry list of grievances at this point still? Because these things don't really have much to do with each other. I guess that we're still in the phase of listing off the things we don't like about society right now? Okay. So cancel culture. Okay.
They should realize that they were warned about the inevitable consequences they are currently witnessing.
Uh-huh.
For decades, cultural conservatives sounded the alarm about the disastrous direction the nation would take if it abandoned its moral and cultural traditions.
See, I knew he was going to do that direction. You just know these people are going to do that every fudge time. Yeah, I mean, like, we don't have homelessness and, like, cancel culture and all this because we abandoned some great moral tradition, okay? Like, if anything, cancel culture is about holding people more to account. If anything, it's a hyper moral panic. If anything, it's too far into the realm of like we're so moral that no one can make any mistakes. It's like, okay, too far. Settle down. We're the internet lynch mob. We're here to destroy you. It's like, okay, cool, great. Sit, have a seat, take a number. But you know, the idea that this is all due to moral degradation. I mean, like, everything you listed, I could say there's probably a better explanation for, but of course there is. I don't know. Let me think. Is there anything we could really attribute in this country to just primarily to moral degradation? This is just about moral degradation here. I'm really struggling to think of anything like that. I think that, you know, what you call moral degradation, I would call freedom of choice. So yeah.
But those warnings fell on deaf ears. Cultural taste.
They didn't fall on deaf ears. First of all, a lot of them fell on ears that were very receptive. So that's kind of a strange thing to say because there's a lot of people are conservative in this country. So the idea that no one listened to this great message is kind of silly. I mean, we've heard this message before. It's old hat. But you know, the ears that it fell on, I don't think they were deaf so much as they were just credulous. They just said, like, okay, interesting ideas. You got anything to back that stuff up? And then you said, no, we don't. And then the conversation was over at that point, right?
Tastemakers assured the population that they were too sophisticated to be bound by the small-minded and primitive mores of their social inferiors. And now the cost.
This is one of those conservatives that's trying really hard to sound like an academic, I guess. I'm going to have to actually pay attention here. I mean, normally I should be able to just like half pay attention and still get it because it's in English. But this is one of those guys that feels the need to hyperinflate every word out of his mouth. I'll try not to judge too much. I mean, I don't know. From the pictures I saw of him, he looks like he's a little too old for that kind of nonsense, but you know, whatever.
Is coming due.
All right, I'm going to pay attention starting here.
Status signaling is a very powerful tool. People naturally want to be seen as interesting, desirable, sophisticated, and worthy of respect. No one wants.
So he's basically saying, yeah, you motherfuckers, everyone wants to be a special snowflake, right? Prior to that taking on a negative connotation. Everyone wants to be special. Everyone wants to be unique. So that's what he's saying.
Wants to be seen as simple, foolish, or low class. Individuals instinctually look to those at the top of the social hierarchy to understand what their society perceives as upper class.
Yeah, sure. People look to the people above them to set the tone. Okay.
Is worthy of emulation. Despite what our trite cultural propaganda tells you, most people are not unique and delicate snowflakes who generate their own perceptions of social value a priori. Instead, they look to those who have achieved higher social standing, assume that
he's basically saying that, people who have risen to the top of society, other people look to them as exemplars of how to live in society, which this is a flawed thing. Probably not for the reasons he's going to lay out, but we'll see.
Those individuals know something the average person doesn't know and adjust their behavior accordingly. This is not to insult or belittle anyone for this behavior. It is a natural and easily observable pattern that everyone falls into, myself included. There is no virtue in denying the truth of human behavior. And by being honest about these...
I mean, you could have... Dude, hey, word of the not so wise on this, but like, you could have just said like what I just said. When people see someone rise to the top of the social hierarchy, they assume that they're an exemplar and view them as someone to emulate. And then you said it. It's like a couple sentences and you're done and you can move on to your salient points. We don't need a long-winded explanation of how this shit works. I think everyone understands the concept of a role model. There's a literal word for it. It's a hyphenate, but it is still one word.
Traditions are the avenue through which societies transmit their collective knowledge. Lessons that were learned at great cost by our ancestors are encoded deep in our psyches through moral values, rituals, and taboos.
Oh, stay away from fire. Thag burn hand on fire. Ugh, think fire might have utility. Thag disagree. Thag hand get hurt. Is tradition. You know what I mean? Like, we literally cannot progress if we're enslaved to tradition. Just because our ancestors learned a lesson, maybe they didn't learn the right lesson. Maybe it's time for us to take a different crack at the same problem with our own unique perspective, learning from what they did before, right? Hey, our ancestors tried this. It didn't work for these reasons. Let's make some like adjustments to this. I think it failed because this thing happened. Okay, let's try to address that. Like, that would be like the rational being's response to this. The irrational being's response to a setback is, let's never ever do anything even resembling what we attempted there again. Which, granted, sometimes is prudent, but a lot of times is a little bit like, I mean, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You're being a little too dismissive. And by the way, like, do you think that human beings looked like this 1950s pooped from the dawn of time until the 1950s when it all went awry? Because that's not how it was. Like, they had to claw their way to this. Humanity continues to claw. Maybe you don't like where we are right now, and you're free to try to pull in a different direction, but like, that's literally always been the way of things. There were people living at this time that a picture like this could have been taken. Obviously, this is a painting, but like, they were living they were living in this time, and they looked at it and saw nothing but like degeneracy and decadence and like frivolity, and had some other time that they hearkened back to as the ultimate age, back when things were good. That's always been with us. And it's always been a faulty bit of reasoning. And it's never been a good idea to make regression your policy. And tradition is nothing more than bad ideas codified.
This social continuity, this great chain of being, is one of the key things that binds a group together and makes them a cohesive people or nation. It is what grants us identity, purpose, and a sense of belonging.
No, it's what prevents identity. This is the dumbest thing I hate about conservatives, man. I hate this shit where they say that we derive our identity from basically the collective. This is some weird Orwellian doublethink mixed with the values of the Borg from Star Trek. Individuality does not come from joining the herd and, you know, cultural hegemony. It comes from the ability to explore different facets of your personality and belong to different subcultures and to travel freely this globe of ours and to be exposed to different people, different ideas, different cuisines, different architectural styles, different everything. See it all, see as much as possible, and, incorporate what you like and don't incorporate what you don't like. And through that process of selection and choosing and making these choices about where you want to go, who you want to talk to, how you want to dress, making those choices is what constitutes becoming an individual. Doing this just means that you've given up on any pursuit of individuality and you've decided you're just going to be a unit. That's what this is. This is the opposite of individuality. So don't tell me it's individuality. It's not. That's Orwellian bullshit. This is not individuality. This is the antithesis.
If you want to fundamentally transform a society to grant you or your group more power, one of the most effective things you can do is work to alter the underlying traditions and morals of that society. But achieving this is harder than it sounds.
That is a very weird way to phrase a struggle for civil rights. Basically anybody, think about that. Think about viewing every civil rights movement in this country as an attempt to undermine the existing values of that country to the point where your group now is in power. So basically, it's just viewed by them as like a little piece of a power struggle. Everything is viewed from those dynamics. There's no concept in the conservative brain about justice. There's no concept in the conservative brain about freedom. There's only our group have power. Anyone who go against us for any reason or try to make us change our mind is against our power and wants to threaten our power, and we have to suppress them. And that's the entire mentality. They behave like an ant colony. They behave like a cluster of cancer cells. They behave like any sort of super organism does. They act with one will. They have one intent. They know exactly what lies they need to tell when. They know exactly when to pretend to be for this thing or that thing when they're really hiding their true agenda. This is so fucking transparent to me. I don't know who doesn't see it. I don't know how many of the conservatives who pretend they don't see it are being honest when they pretend they don't see it, and how many know it's the truth but believe it in their hearts but just won't say it out loud because they know it sounds bad. But this is the truth, right? Like, can we admit that? Am I wrong? Am I not seeing something?
They are woven at every level into the day-to-day existence of the average person. These traditions inform family formation, religious observances, workplace interactions, artistic pursuits, and even casual entertainment. The project of replacing those values must alter the moral framework that guides the lives of members of that civilization.
If you have freedom, necessarily you're going to have to broaden your horizons, right? If you can only create art that falls within the spectrum of one particular moral ideal, if you can only dress in a way that fits that ideal, if you can only arrange your family in a way that meets that ideal across the board, what you're basically saying is that there is a prescribed way to live your life that people should adhere to, and anybody who doesn't adhere to it is a threat to that way of life. How can you possibly look at that and view that as freedom or individuality? It is the opposite in every way. What is the counter argument to that? There isn't one. I'm just flat out fudge right on that.
The best way to do that is to hijack the system of social signaling.
This guy's about to say that like the popular people have been like artificially placed there in order to like push this narrative agenda. But like people get popular organically. You can't manufacture popularity. Ask anybody in marketing. Like if there's a product that just flat out has no desirability to it, you can't sell that fudge product no matter how much money you put into advertising it. Look at all these box office flops like Cutthroat Island. There was nothing they could do. There was no advertisement campaign they could put out. There was no way to show that movie. There was nothing they could possibly do to sell it to the American movie-going public. It just didn't hold any appeal. No matter how much money they poured into it, they just couldn't get people interested. And that's how it is with popularity. Like no matter, like someone has to have something going on. Sure, have there been giant corporations that have gotten behind people like Ben Shapiro and said, like, we got to push this Ben Shapiro as fudge hard as we possibly can? Of course. But if Ben Shapiro didn't have some natural ability to captivate an audience of some kind, it wouldn't matter. And even if you look at the Daily Wire, they push all of their people on that platform equally, but some lag way behind the others because you just can't sell people a dog turd. Even people who are conservative, even people who are nitwits, even people who believe all the wrong things, and I totally disagree with on most, they can tell the difference between a good quality grifter who's going to really and go out there and spew the talking points they want real good, and someone who they're just like, I don't like that guy. They still know when something actually entertains them. They still know when something actually holds some modicum of appeal to them. And you can't just manufacture a popular person. It just, because if you put forth some tepid, bland personality, no matter how much, ideological incentive a person might have to pretend that person has something going on, if they're not genuinely compelled, eventually they're going to fall off the wagon on it.